All right, we're live. Let's continue the essay we've been reading yesterday. We still got 4 pages left, so we'll complete that. And I got exam today, so we'll leave early. As YC grew, we started to notice other advantages of scale. The alumni became a tight community, dedicated to help one another, and especially the current batch, whose shoes they remember being in. We also noticed that the startups were becoming one another's customers. We used to refer jokingly to the YC GDP. As the YC grows, this becomes less of and less of a joke. Now lots of startups get their initial set of customers almost entirely from among their batchmates. I had not originally intended YC to grow to be a full-time job. I was going to do three things: hack, write essays, and work on YC. As YC grew, I grew more excited about it. It started to take up a lot more than a third of my attention. But for the first few years, I was still able to work on other things. In the summer of 2006, Robert and I started working on a new version of Arc. This one was reasonably fast because it was compiled into Scheme. To test this new Arc, I wrote Hacker News on it. It was originally meant to be a news aggregator for startup founders and was called Startup News. But after a few months, I got tired of reading nothing but startups. Plus, it wasn't startup founders we wanted to reach, it was future startup founders. So I changed the name to Hacker News and the topic to whatever engaged one's intellectual curiosity. Hacker News was no doubt good for YC, but it was also far by far the biggest source of stress for me. If all I'd had to do was select and help founders, life would have been so easy. And that implies that Hacker News was a mistake. Surely the biggest source of stress is one's work. In one's work, it should at least be something close to the core of the work. Whereas I was like someone who was in a pain while running in a marathon, not from the exertion of running, but because of the blister from an ill fitting shoe. When I was dealing with some urgent problem during YC, there was about 60% chance it has to do with Hacker News and 40% chance it had to do with everything else combined. As well as Hacker News, I wrote all the YC's internal software in Arc. But while I continued to work a good deal in Arc, I gradually stopped working on Arc, partly because I didn't have time to, and partly because it was a lot less attractive to mess around with the language now that I had all this infrastructure depending on it. So now my three projects are reduced to two: writing essays, working on YC. YC was different from other kinds of work I've done. Instead of deciding for myself what I work on, the problems came to me. Every 6 months there was a new batch of startups, and their problems, whatever they were, became our problems. It was very engaging work because their problems were quite varied, and the good founders were very effective. If you were trying to learn the most you could about startups in the shortest possible time, you couldn't have picked a better way to do it. There were parts of job I didn't like: disputes between co-founders, figuring out when the people are lying to us, fighting with people who maltreated their startups, and so on. But I worked hard even in the parts I didn't like. I was haunted by something Kevin Hale once said about companies: no one works harder than the boss. He meant it both descriptively and prescriptively, and it was the second part that scared me. I wanted YC to be good. So if how hard I worked set the upper bound on how hard everyone else worked, I'd better work very hard. One day in 2010, when he was visiting California for interviews, Robert Morris did something astonishing. He offered me unsolicited advice. I can only remember him doing that before. One day at Viaweb, when I was bent over double from a kidney stone, he suggested that would be a good idea for him to take me to the hospital. That was what took RTM to offer solicited advice. So I remember his exact words very clearly. He said, you should make sure Y Combinator isn't the last cool thing you do. At the time I didn't understand what he meant, but gradually it dawned on me that he was saying I should quit. This seemed strange advice because YC was doing great. But if there was one thing rarer than RTM offering advice, it was RTM being wrong. So this set me thinking. It was true that on my current trajectory, YC would be a last thing I did because it was only taking more of my attention. It had already eaten ARC and was in the process of eating essays too. Either YC was my life's work or I'd had to leave eventually. And it wasn't, so I would. In summer of 2012, my mother had a stroke, and the cause turned out to be a blood clot caused by colon cancer. The stroke destroyed her balance and she was put in nursing home. But she really wanted to get out of it and back to her house. And my sister and I were determined to help her do it. I used to fly up to Oregon to visit her regularly and had a lot of time to think about those flights. On one of them, I realized I was ready to hand YC over to someone else. I asked Jessica if I wanted to be the president, but if she wanted to be the president, but she didn't. So we decided we'd try to recruit Sam Altman. Oh my god, the boss entered. We talked to Robert and Trevor and we agreed to make it a complete changing of the guard. Up till the point YC has been controlled by the original LLC before it has started, but we wanted YC to last for a long time, and to do that, it couldn't be controlled by the founders. So if Sam said yes, we let him recognize YC, Robert, and I would retire. Jessica and Trevor would become ordinary partners. When we asked Sam if he wanted to be the president of YC, initially he said no. He wanted to start a startup to make nuclear reactors. Wow. But I kept at it, and in October 2013, he finally agreed. We decided he'd take over starting with winter 2014 batch. For the rest of the 2013, I left running YC more and more to Sam. Partly he could learn the job. Partly so he could learn the job, and partly because I was focused on my mother, whose cancer had returned. She died on January 15th, 2014. We knew this was coming, but it was still hard when it did. I kept working on YC till March to help get the batch of startups through demo day. Then I checked out pretty completely. I still talk to alumni and new startups working on things I'm interested in, but that only takes few hours a week. What should I do next? RTM's advice hadn't included anything about that. I want to do something completely different, so I decided to paint. I want to see how good I could get if I really focused on it. So the day after I stopped working, I started painting. It was rusty. It took a while to get back into shape, but it was at least completely engaging. I spent most of the rest 2014 painting. I'd never been able to work so uninterruptedly before, and I got better than I had been. Not good enough, but better. Then in November, right in the middle of the painting, I ran out of steam. Up till that point, I had always been curious to see how the painting I was working on turned out. But suddenly finishing this one seemed like a chore. So I stopped working on it and cleaned my brushes and haven't painted since. So far, anyway. Oh gosh, that's a decade. Bad. It's just sad. I realize that sounds rather whimper, but attention to is a zero-sum game. If you can choose what to work on, and you choose a project that's not the best one, or at least a good one for you, then it's getting in the way of another project that is. And at 50, there was some opportunity cost to screwing around. I started writing essays again, and wrote a bunch of new ones over the next few months. I even wrote a couple that were double startups. And then in March 2015, I started working on Lisp again. The distinctive thing about Lisp is that it's a core language. Its core is the language defined by writing an interpreter in itself. It wasn't originally intended as a programming language in a ordinary sense. It was meant to be the formal model of computation, an alternative to the Turing machine. If you want to write an interpreter for a language in itself, what's the minimum set of predefined operators you need? The Lisp that John McCarthy invented, or more accurately discovered, is an answer to the question. McCarthy didn't realize this could even be used to write computer programs till his grad student Steve Russell suggested it. Russell translated McCarthy's interpreter to IBM 704 machine language, and from that point, Lisp started to be a programming language in ordinary sense. But its origins as a model of computation gave it power and elegance that other language couldn't match. It was the attracted me in the college though. I didn't understand why at that time. McCarthy's 1960 Lisp did nothing more than interpret Lisp expressions. It was missing a lot of things you'd want in a programming language. So these had to be added. And when they weren't defined using McCarthy's original axiomatic approach. That wouldn't have been feasible at that time. McCarthy tested his interpreter by hand simulating the execution of programs. But it was already getting close to the limit of interpreters he could test the way they intended. There was a bug in the McCarthy had overlooked. To test the more complicated interpreter, you'd have to run it, and computers weren't powerful enough. Now they are, though. Now you could continue McCarthy's axiomatic approach till you'd define a computer programming language. And as long as every change you made to McCarthy's Lisp was discovered as preserving transformation, you could, in principle, end up with a complete language that had its quality. Harder to do than talk about, of course, but it was possible in principle. Why not try? So I decided to take a shot at it. It took 4 years from March 2015 to October 2019. It was fortunate that I had a precisely defined goal, or it would have been hard to keep up for so long. I wrote this new Lisp called Bell, itself in Arc. That may sound like a contradiction, but it's an indication that sort of trickery I had to engage to make this work. By means of an egregious collection of hacks, I managed to make something close enough to an interpreter written itself that could actually run, not fast, but fast enough to test. I had to ban myself from writing essays during most of this time, and I'd never have finished. In late 2015, I spent 3 months writing essays. And when I went back to working on Bell, I barely understood the code. Not so much because it was badly written, as because the problem was so convoluted. When you're working on an interpreter written in itself, it's hard to keep track of what's happening at what level, and errors that can be practically encrypted by the time you get them. So I said no more essays till Bell was done. but I told few people about Bell when I was working on it. So for years, it must have been seemed like I was doing nothing. In fact, I was working on harder than I would ever worked on anything. Occasionally, after wrestling hours with some gruesome bug, I check Twitter on or Hacker News and see something. That's probably ground still gold. Working on Bell was hard but satisfying. I worked on it so intensely that at any given time I had a decent chunk of code on my head and could write more there. I remember talking to the boys in the coast in a sunny day 2015, figuring out how to deal with some problem involving continuations while I watched them play in the tide pools. It felt like I was doing the life right. I remember that because I was slightly dismayed at how novel it felt. The good news is that I had more moments like this in the over next few years. In summer of 2016, we had moved to England. We wanted our kids to see what it was living like in another country, and since I was a British citizen by birth, that seemed the obvious choice. We only meant to stay for a year, but we liked it so much that we still live here. So most of the Bell was written in England. In the fall of 2019, Bell was finally finished, like McCarthy's original list. It's a spec rather than an implementation. Although the McCarthy's list which a spec express as code, now I could write essays again. I wrote a bunch of topics I had stacked up. I kept writing essays through 2020, but also I started to think about other things I could work on. How should I choose what to do? Well, how had I chosen what to work on in the past? I wrote an essay for myself to answer the question. I was surprised how long and messy the answer turned out to be. If this surprised me, who'd lived it? Then I thought perhaps it would be interesting to other people and encouraging to those with similarly messy lives. So I wrote a more detailed version of it for others to read. And this is the last sentence of it. Cool. I really want to read this too. Gosh. Millionaire Spring. Is it one man? Okay. I'll read that thing. It's more earnestness and willingness build. This is long as fuck. I don't get. I don't have time. I don't have time. Let's read it now. Earnestness. Jessica and I have certain words that have specific. Have specific. Okay, fuck it. Jessica and I. What the fuck happened to me? Jessica and I have certain words that have special significance when we're talking about startups. The highest compliment we can pay to founders is to describe them as earnest. This is not by itself a guarantee of success. You could be earnest but incapable. But when founders are both formidable and earnest, they are close to unstoppable as you get. Earnestness sounds like boring even in Victorian virtue. If it seems a bit of anachronism that people in Silicon Valley would care about it. Why does it matter so much? When you call someone earnest, You're making a statement about their motives. It means both that they are doing something for the right reasons and they are trying as hard as they can. If we imagine motives as vectors, it means both the direction and the magnitude are right. Okay. Though these are the though these are of course related, when people are doing something for the right reasons, they try harder. The reason motives matter is the reason motives matter so much in Silicon Valley is that so many people have the wrong ones. Starting a successful startups makes you rich and famous. So a lot of people try to start them are doing it for those reasons instead of the interest in problem for its own sake. That is the root of earnestness. It's also the hallmark of a nerd. Indeed, when people describe themselves as ex-nerds, what they mean is that they're interested in X for its own sake, but not because it's cool to be interested in it, but because they can get from it what they can get from it. They're saying they care so much about X that they're willing to sacrifice seeming cool for that sake. A genuine interest in something is very powerful motivator for some people. The most powerful motivator of all, which is why it's what Jessica and Luke in the founders. But as well as being a source of strength, it's also a source of vulnerability. Caring constrains you. The earnest can't easily reply in kind to mocking banter or put a cool facade of nihil admirari. They care too much. They're too doomed to be they're doomed to be the straight man. That's a real disadvantage in your teenage years. When mocking banter and nihil admirari, what the fuck is nihil admirari? Often have upper hand. To wonder it, nothing. When mocking banter and nihil admirari often have upper hand, but it becomes an advantage later. It's a common place now that the kids who were nerds in high schools become cool kids and bosses later on. But people misunderstood why this happens. It's not just because the nerds are smarter, but also because they're more earnest. When problems get harder than fake ones you're given in high school, caring about them starts to matter. Does it always matter? Do the earnestness always win? Not always. It probably doesn't matter even It probably doesn't matter much in politics or in crime or in certain types of business that are similar to crime like gambling, personal injury law, patent trolling and so on. Nor does it matter in academic fields at the more bogus end of the spectrum. And though I don't know enough to say for sure, it may not matter in some kinds of humor. It may be possible to be completely cynical and still be fun. Looking at the list of fields I mentioned, there is an obvious pattern, except possibly for humor. These are all types of work I would avoid like the plague. So that could be useful heuristic for deciding which fields to work on. How much does earnestness matter, and what can in turn presumably be inferred from prevalence of nerds at the top. Along with nerd, another word tends to be associated with earnestness is naive. The earnest always seem naive. It's not just that they don't have motives that other people have, they often don't fully grasp that such motives exist. Or they may know intellectually that they do, but because they don't feel them, they forget about them. It works to be slightly naive, not just about motives, but also, believe it or not, about the problems you're working on. Naive optimism can compensate for the bit rot that rapid change causes in established beliefs. You plunge into some problem saying how hard can it be, and then after solving it, you learn that it was still recently insoluble. Naivete is an obstacle for anyone who wants to seem sophisticated, and this is the reason would be intellectuals find it so difficult to understand Silicon Valley. It haven't been safe for such people to use word earnest outside scare codes since Oscar Wilde wrote The Importance of Being Earnest in 1895. And yet, when you zoom in on the Silicon Valley, right into Jessica Livingston's brain, that's what her X-ray vision is seeking out in the founders. Earnestness. Who would have guessed? Reports literally can't believe it when founders make make making piles of money say that they started their companies to make world better. The situation seems made for mockery. How can these founders be so naive as not to realize how implausible they sound? Though those asking questions, though those asking this question don't realize that's not a rhetorical question. A lot of founders are faking it, of course, particularly in smaller fry and soon to be smaller fry, but not all of them. There are a significant number of founders who really are interested in the problem they're solving mainly for its own sake. Why shouldn't be there? Why shouldn't there be? We have no difficulty believing people would be interested in history or math or even old bus tickets of their own sake. Why can't there be people interested in self-driving cars or social networks for their own sake? When you can't look into the question from this side, it seems obvious there would be. And isn't it likely to have a deep interest in something that would be source of great energy and resilience? It is in every other field. The question really is why we have a blind spot about business. And the answer to that is obvious. If you know enough history, for most history, making large amount of making large amounts of money has not been very intellectually interesting. In pre-industrial times, it was never far away from robbery, and some areas of businesses still retain that character except using lawyers instead of soldiers. But there are other areas of business where work is genuinely interesting. Henry Ford got to Henry Ford got to spend much of his time working on interesting technical problems, and for the last several decades, that trend in that direction has been accelerating. It's much easier now to make a lot of money by working on something you're interested in than it was 50 years ago, and that rather than how fast they grew may be the most important change that startup represent. Though indeed the fact that work is genuinely interested in the big part of why it gets done so fast. Can you imagine a more important change than one in the relationship between intellectual curiosity and money? These are the two most powerful forces in the world, and in my lifetime they've become significantly more aligned. How could you not be fascinated to watch something like this happening in real time? I mean, this is said to be about earnestness generally, but now I've gone and talked about startups again. But I suppose at least it serves as an example of an ex-nerd in the wild. So, this is it. Let's just time to summarize this. Summarize. Oh, I didn't actually open the thing. Okay, I did again. I must have. Where is it? Hi. Where the hell is Arts Browser? Oh, that's Figma. Shit. Oh. So, should I include that into mistakes made by startups, or should I just leave it there as a news page? I don't think there is a lot to learn from this thing. It's just the same earnestness they have. And I've been reading in how to work hard, right? Let's just write it there. Right. So there are two things he'll be caring about. It's like one is being earnest and another being formidable. So being earnest is just, it means both doing something for the right reasons and they are trying as hard as they can. If you can imagine what is vectors, this is such a fucking important statement. This will go into the Twitter. Hahaha. I wish I had more time to spend for these things. Yeah.
Co-founder and CEO of Juicebox, about how to source great engineering and sales talent. Juicebox is an AI sourcing platform backed by Sequoia and used by Ramp, Cursor, and Perplexity to recruit the best talent in the world. First, we'll hear his presentation, and then we'll have a conversation to dig deeper.
Oh, man. Holy shit, this is important. Yeah, 100 hours. I figured that out in like 5 hours or something. You're crazy, dude. You're really crazy. Or are you just gaslighting people? Come on. This is just ridiculous. 100 hours testing these buttons. Bro, what the fuck? It just literally took me 5 hours and 100 hours of actually building a product instead of this. Few short examples. Context based constraints, auto specification. Let me see your research. Oh, come on. Blog. Thread of thought maintains coherent reason. Self-critic, reflection prompting. Okay, I don't think this would work. Check for logical inconsistencies and actual errors. This is something very crazy because provide refined version addressing these issues. Okay, this is good. I mean, but still not 100%. 100 or hours of work, obviously. Race framework, role action context execution. Using and specify the task, specify the logic, such as response and feedback. Come on, give me something that would help me. This is giving more context. ARB testing, multiple prompt information systematically. Try different phrasings and same construction. Full selections. Oh, no. Shut up. Shut up. Where did it go? Yeah, here it is. It's not that bad actually. It's not that bad. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. Nice dude, nice. Success in election. Evidence everywhere. Oh my god. Prompt engineers everywhere. All they do is talk about prompts. There it is. Again. Where was I? Oh my god. Okay. Here. Why is this open? Where the fuck is... Yeah. It's also a hallmark of a nerd. Oh my god. I forgot I'm recording live. Shit. I'm sorry. When people describe themselves as ex-nerds, what they mean. Okay. You want to be a nerd, right? They're interested in X for its own sake, not because it's cool, but interested. That's why they can. This is also very good. So much. I will sacrifice human being. Cool for its sake. Nobody is reading it today. Yes, everybody is on a break. What prompts, dude? Not hiring on X. I'm more of a guy who wants to get hired. What is X Pro? being in public is doing well somehow. I don't think so. So I think that's it. Why shouldn't there be? There has been no difficulty for that. Believing that people would be interested in, okay, this is okay. The question really is why we have blind spot about business. The answer to that is obvious if you know enough history. For most history, large amount of money is still retain character except for money. In its presence. Right. All right, let's close it now. I gotta prepare for exams. Thank you.